If you have ever heard me talk about coins, if you have read an article that I have written, you've probably heard or read me use some variation on the phrase, not all money is coin, not all coin is money. I don't think anyone ever gets confused about that second part. If you turn a coin into a piece of jewellery, then it's not money anymore. Most coins spend most of their existence not being money. However, the first part is not, in my experience, always fully appreciated. There is a tendency people to have what I would call a yes but response. Yes, but most money is coin. So let me talk about money in the pre-modern world. Most of us know that bank accounts predate computers. But we often forget just how long money of account has been used for and how elaborate such systems can be. From the 3rd century AD in Egypt, a set of papyri survived, known as the Hieronymus Archive. They are fragments of working documents from a private estate, named after the manager who appears most frequently in them. The only work on these I know is by Rathbone, and Rathbone notes employees were not paid in coins. Their salary was credited to an internal account from which taxes, purchases of estate products, etc. could be debited. Coin was only withdrawn infrequently compared to credits and debits of the account balances, and as payment of taxes suggests, not even for all interactions outside the estate. And money of account is not alone. Another intangible form of money in pre-modern economies comes from short-term credit. What do I mean by short-term credit? Well, let me give you an example. The 18th century poet Mir wrote an autobiography, and in it he describes the practical issues around his father's death. Obviously, he is not describing this because he wants to communicate the details of 18th century probate. He is mostly settling scores with his half-brother. But the point we need to note is that his father says he owes 300 rupees to the shopkeepers in the market. 300 rupees is a lot of money. You could easily do your daily shopping on a rupee or two. Yes, Mir's father was a local dignitary, he had a large household, his daily expenses, despite Mir's protestations, were probably quite a bit above average, but still, 300 rupees is a lot of money. It must represent many transactions with many different businesses. Presumably, these transactions involved servants purchasing goods without coins. Instead, the traders kept tabs, a note of how much Mir's household had purchased, and this would have been settled up on occasion. While the amount owed to an individual trader might have been relatively small, as 300 rupees suggests, it could be quite a substantial volume of money across the whole market, far more than the household has on hand in coins. And this was probably normal in the pre-modern world. The bulk of small monetary transactions between people in their everyday communities would have been handled through a tab, a short-term credit, and only very occasionally settled by other means. So, as I said, sometimes not all money is coin meets a yes, but most is. People know about money of account and short-term credit, but think those are relatively rare. And if I'm honest, it's very hard to assess the relative quantity of these things. How exceptional was Mir's father? How unusual was the estate Hieronymus managed? We don't really know, though as these examples illustrate, it is entirely possible in a pre-modern context for coins to make up only a small minority of the available money for a particular household. Yes, but this brings me to the second way in which not all money is coin is often misunderstood. I think there are plenty of people who accept what I've already said, but they assume that coin fills the gap that money of account and short-term credit, intangible monies, cannot handle. So people hear not all money is coin and they think, yes, but all physical money is coin. Let me quickly dispose of banknotes. A banknote works in a very similar way to a coin. A modern banknote works identically to a modern coin and is interchangeable with it, though that has not always been the case. This is an example of a Ming banknote, made in the 14th century in China. That is 2,000 years after the first coins were invented. To be fair, there are older banknotes. As a recent study remarks, the Ming note owes its fame more to Neil MacGregor's incredibly popular History of the World in 100 Objects than anything about the notes themselves. In China, banknotes are at least 400 years older, but China is somewhat exceptional. Only in the modern world did banknotes begin to significantly and widely supplement coinage. Excluding banknotes, there are two relatively common physical representations of money which are not coins, which are relevant to the pre-modern world and whose chronology is often misunderstood. These are commodity money and negotiable financial instruments. Let's start with what those are. Commodity money is a general term for a wide variety of objects, usually of a standardized format and quality. These can be naturally occurring objects, like cowrie shells, which enjoyed a particularly long and entrenched use in the Bay of Bengal. They can be deliberately manufactured, like manillas, which were used on the west coast of Africa. They can fall somewhere in between, as in the hack silver economies in the early Middle Ages. You will sometimes hear these referred to as primitive money or primitive coins. Those are very misleading terms. They are neither primitive in the sense of unsophisticated, nor in the sense of being precursors. In fact, the most sophisticated pre-modern economic system, distributed communal accounting on the island of Yap in the Pacific, which predates cryptocurrencies by centuries, was based around a commodity money, the large worked stones known as rai. And while commodity monies did exist before coins, every example I just gave is from the last 2,000 years. What about transferable financial instruments? Let us return for a moment to Mir's predicament with his father's debts. He writes, "Just then, a man sent by Saeed Mikmal Khan, a discipline of my reverend uncle, arrived with a bill of payment worth 500 rupees, newly minted, and shared my grief. I gave 300 rupees to the creditors and obtained a full receipt of clearance. Then I spent another 100 rupees and had the dervish properly buried next to his spiritual master." Bills of exchange, or bills of payment, can be a little bit fuzzy. All of these terms are a little bit fuzzy, and they can blur with banknotes. When they are used purely to transfer funds from one person to another, they're not really money, but they become money once they are transferable. Such documents, which might represent transfers or loans, simply need to be legally usable by the bearer rather than an original party. Such things were common in Mughal India, and this must have been the case here because the bill is cashed by Mir, even though it was apparently for Mir's father. If Mir had owed a single creditor, he might even have paid with the bill itself, rather than bothering to cash it. These, commodity money and negotiable instruments, are two physical representations of money which are not coins, and I've anticipated the next yes but, which is yes but in the ancient world, coins superseded one and preceded the other. I think this is a common assumption. The idea goes like this. Before coins were invented, people used commodity money as a physical representation. And that is definitely true. Early Chinese coins resemble commodity money. That's why we call them spade and knife money. And the Albion dolphins follow on from cast arrowheads in a way that blurs the boundary between coins and commodity money. It is from this that the idea of commodity money as primitive money derives, and the assumption that as coinage was adopted, it must have displaced commodity money. And the opposite assumption applies to negotiable financial instruments, which are widely used today, that they are a modern feature, like banknotes, that they must have originated only with globalization, modern nation states, and sophisticated banking operations. And that assumption is completely wrong. I've already illustrated that commodity money widely persists throughout the world, and that is because it works very differently to coinage. Commodity money generally does not depend on the authority of a third party, as coins usually do, which is why you frequently find it involved in long-distance cross-border trade. And why modern cryptocurrencies, which are basically an electronic commodity money, are also often used for similar cross-border remittances. Commodity money also has disadvantages because it depends on social institutions, it is often special purpose, and its value is rarely stable. So it was never a case of coins or commodity money displacing each other, but of the two serving different, often complementary functions. Likewise, it's not particularly difficult to show that negotiable instruments are quite old and quite widespread. In England, there is a famous legal case about them, Burton versus Davy, 1436. Davy is pursued for refusing to pay out on a debt to Burton. But, and this is the key point, they are not sued by Burton. They are sued by another merchant, Walden, who is in possession of the credit note. There is a good article on this by Moore which goes into the difficulties of interpretation because the case is actually about points of court procedure, so the details of the transaction are a bit opaque. But it is clear evidence that loan documents payable to the bearer were in use as currency in their own right in 15th century London. And loan documents of that type are centuries older in India. Two collections of model documents survive, and in one of those there is a copy of a document dating to the 9th century, a loan contract payable to the bearer on demand. So a document that could be used as a negotiable instrument. And in the 11th century we have references in a historical chronicle to such documents known as hundika being used in that way. Again, much like commodity money, negotiable instruments work very differently to coins, so they are much better suited to certain types of exchange. But in most societies, they operated alongside rather than displacing or being displaced by coinage. Let me briefly recap. Money is one of the ways that human beings organise economic exchange. It's not the only way. I have not talked about them today, but you can use gifts and redistribution in the absence of money, and those played an important part in pre-modern economies. Money is just one element of economic exchange, and physical representations are only a subset of money. Money of account or short-term credit are important intangible monies in most societies. And even when you get down to physical representations, and you exclude those which are very similar to coins, like tokens, or which have only become common in the modern world, like banknotes, coins are still only one part. So when I say not all money is coin, I'm not suggesting that there are edge cases, or that money is more than its physical representation, or that coins replaced or were replaced in turn. I am suggesting literally what I say, that for most of human history, in most societies, for most people, coins formed only a small part of the economic exchanges they engaged in. Could I go into more detail? You could write whole books on just small aspects of these different forms of exchange of money. People have. And there is a lot of fuzziness. I've presented this as a series of divisions into categories because it's easier to think in categorical terms, and it's useful to have a heuristic, a rough model, that puts coins into their proper context. In the real world, all of these things overlap and interact and mingle together in complex ways, but you need the model to avoid slipping into errors. One that I've seen a lot is in work on ancient Greece. We know that the city-state of Sparta used a commodity money consisting of iron spits. Ancient contemporaries explicitly say that they did this. The Oboloi are archaeologically well attested, and yet, naming no names, I've encountered a lot of classicists tying themselves in knots trying to argue the iron spits are not money. And when you read closely, it becomes apparent that their definition of money is really a definition of coins. They are conflating the two, and thus getting confused when they encounter money that isn't coins. The first thing to say about why this confusion arises is that there are a lot of reasons. However, I want to focus on one, the tyranny of our sources. This is a subtle thing, but because historians can only work from primary sources, we are constantly constrained by them. If the only sources which survive are about a particular topic, almost all of the literature will be on that topic, and it becomes very hard to read the gaps. And the tyranny of coins on our imagination is enormous. They are inherently more survivable than financial instruments. Remember, the two examples I just gave you don't survive. One is recorded as a model in a later text, the other is referenced by a court record, but the documents themselves long ago turned to dust. And because of the way coins work, they are instantly recognizable. They self-identify. Commodity money isn't easy to recognize at all. How do you know a bangle isn't jewellery? That an iron spit isn't just a spit? And heaven help working out if a cowrie you found was used as money. And it's even worse for the intangible monies, for money of account or short-term credit. Yes, people kept records of those, but most of our ancient texts survive because they were copied. Papyri and birchbark caches are the exception, not the rule, and there is no reason to copy an account once it has served its purpose. Coins, durable, mass-produced, readily identified, dominate our sources, and because our literature responds to our sources, they dominate our literature. There are specialist departments dedicated to numismatics, which until the 1970s and 1980s did just mean coins. For a lot of people, it still does. If you work on pre-modern material, unless you work on something older than 2,500 years ago, you will see coins everywhere. But barring some unusual survivals, you might never see evidence of other monies. For this episode, simply to illustrate the points, I've had to range from the 3rd century to the 18th century, from London to Delhi, and to reference evidence I'm not really that familiar with, because in my own area of expertise, only evidence that survives are coins. Though there is no question, coins were not the only money. I spoke in the last episode about the origin of coinage in South and Central Asia. The origin of coinage is an interesting question, and the advent of coinage is a huge boon to the historian. However, it's a tough question to answer. Why, when exactly, for what purpose did coins originate? In part because it requires unthinking a host of assumptions before we can understand a world that did not have coins but might have needed them. And the temptation to equate coin with money is particularly hazardous. If you don't understand the role coin played in the pre-modern world, you are never going to get a good sense of why it was invented. And that is why not all money is coin, not all coin is money, is such an important dictum. Thank you for listening.